Looks like we're starting.
All right.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. I have been asked to tell you all, although you probably know already, that this event is part of the School of the Arts' ongoing Complex Issues series, a series which is defined as, I quote, "Complex Issues explores difference, visibility, and representation through recent work by faculty of Columbia University and Columbia University School of the Arts in particular. Conversations invite challenging questions of racial, ethnic, gender, economic, sexual, religious, and cultural complexity and how they are articulated across discipline and genre today." I will not take responsibility for any of that, but if you want to bring such complex questions to your questions, that would be great. And I'm sure you would be happy to address complexity.
And how? Yeah.
So so that has been said. The way this is going to work is that, so I'm Bruce Robbins, and I'm going to introduce Gary. And then Gary's going to read a section from Lake Success, and then we're going to have a little conversation, probably not a very long one. Then you get to ask questions. Somebody will go around and give you a microphone if you want one. You could sort of go, you know the routine. And then when it looks like you're tired of questions or Gary is tired of answering them, there will be a book signing, I guess, over there.
I'll sign anything.
Checks?
Checks, watch straps, anything.
Okay. Since you're here, you probably know who Gary Shteyngart is. So he doesn't need much of an introduction, as they say. And I do not want to stand for very long or sit for very long between you and the pleasure of hearing him read. So I'll just say something very, very minimal. He's the author of 3 previous novels, as well as a memoir. I am ashamed to say that although I had heard tell of him, I had not read anything until I myself came across Super Sad True Love Story. Yes. In 2011, and I assigned it to one of my classes. I think probably everybody here knows this, but you may not, that Super Sad True Love Story is something very different from the love story that you would expect to get from its title. It's that too, of course, but it's sort of super scary and super funny work of political satire, a sort of Orwellian dystopia updated for the era of social media and the invasion of Venezuela. Oh, many of you have not heard of the invasion of Venezuela. There's a caravan coming up and the army has been sent. There's not much laughter at that. It sounds more serious. Anyway, okay. Then I intersected with Gary when I happened to have the good luck to be on a hiring committee at the School of the Arts. Hiring committees is not usually the sort of thing that gets associated with good luck.
No.
Oh, come on, you know that's true. But in this case, the citizenly duty of reading dossiers and coming to some kind of agreement on them was considerably enlivened by having Gary on the committee. And he also very graciously agreed to talk to my seminar about Super Sad Love Story. And it was something that he did with absolutely no jokes whatsoever, showing the seriousness with which he takes the craft of writing. You did, all right. This is a little bit of self-advertising, but I'm doing this for free, so. Gary graciously agreed to be interviewed for a documentary that I was making called Some of My Best Friends Are Zionists. And I cannot claim that Gary is one of my best friends, although I'll work on that.
Or a Zionist. But
or a Zionist. I was going to say that.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
But I can testify that he knows a great deal about the Middle East. More than you would think a novelist dealing with Russian emigres and hedge fund managers and so on would need to know. Okay. I could actually go on, but I think I'm just going to stop. Please join me in welcoming Gary Shteyngart.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. That was great. Great to see you. Great to be back at my academic home. It's been about 5 months. I really missed the place. This is my 12th year at Columbia. I've never been employed this long anywhere. I'm usually fired within a couple of months, so this is great. And the Lenfest Center is spectacular. Look at this thing. I was worried that it would look, like Goldman Sachs, but it doesn't. Not at all. And I've been to Goldman Sachs. This is much nicer. I like the orange everywhere, the accents. Yeah, very cool. So today I'm going to talk about Lake Success, which has a great cover. That's the main thing you should know about it. It's many Random House focus groups worked on this cover. The way they wanted to do it was they wanted a cover that you could see from across an airport, but a really large one, like Heathrow Terminal 2, right? So this is Heathrow proof. I'll tell you a little bit about the book. So the hero of Lake Success is Barry Cohen, and he's a hedge fund manager. And to be more precise, he's running a hedge fund into the ground while being investigated by the SEC. As the novel starts, Barry decides to run away from his failing marriage, his failing fund, and his autistic son on a Greyhound bus to pursue his college girlfriend in El Paso, Texas. Now, what could drive anyone away from their family when the family needs them so much? Yes, Barry in what in Yiddish is called a schmuck. Right? He's also a small-time ganef, or crook. And as he depletes his funds on his journey across the country, he also becomes a schnorrer, or beggar. So never say you don't learn anything at a Gary Shteyngart reading, right? I've just taught you all the Yiddish you'll ever really need to know, especially if you're interested in finance. People have asked me, why did you write a book about a hedge fund guy? Why not your usual Russian losers? Why not write about yourself some more, basically? Well, in the past decade, I became aware of the fact that a large number of the friends that I'd grown up with in Manhattan were gone, displaced by rising costs to Berlin or Abu Dhabi or the affordable parts of LA or the mid-Hudson Valley where I spent half the year of my time. And my friends who were fellow alumni of Stuyvesant High School and Oberlin College, worked as writers and graphic designers and academics and journalists. They were the heart of what used to be called the creative middle class, but they were all gone. They just couldn't afford it. So as I walked down the now unfamiliar streets of my city, eyeing a new breed of sort of closely shaved, athletic individual, I kept wondering, who are these people? And upon closer inspection, I put on my glasses, I discovered they mostly worked for banks or hedge funds or private equity firms. So, I'm a sort of friendly guy, and I thought, okay, I've met only a handful of bankers in my life, but around 2012, I decided to get to know them more because I decided that my next novel would be about finance, since there was no one else left in my neighborhood to write about. And I realized pretty early on in my research, I realized that people in finance often had a different view of reality than most of the people I'd previously known. An older currency trader at a massive bank, and I'm not going to mention UBS by name, but kidding, it was Credit Suisse anyway. He complained to me of the struggles of the middle class, and I asked him to define the middle class. He spoke of people like himself. And I said, oh, he said, yeah, I'm struggling. And I said, how would you numerically define that struggle? And he said, just earning between $2 and $4 million a year. So when it came time to cobble together a character like Barry Cohen, who makes a lot more than $4 million a year, I kept thinking back to all those wonderful, deluded people I'd met along the way. So I'll read you a little bit of a chapter from Lake Success just to introduce you to Barry. This scene is set in Atlanta, Georgia. It's about midway through the book. Barry gets off the bus in the middle of his journey to visit his protege, Jeff Park, whom he actually fired from his hedge fund at one point. Now, I made this 4 months Greyhound journey myself, so you're welcome. I suffer for you. That's what art is. And at this point in his journey, he's almost run out of money. He's left New York with nothing but a rollerboard full of watches, because he collects high-end watches. And he had to get rid of his credit cards for complicated reasons. And so he's in Atlanta to beg Jeff Park for a little bit of a bridge loan to fund his Greyhound ride across the country. Jeff Park's living room was as palatial as the entrance to a modest New York museum. Enormous golden lights hung from the ceiling, which was at least 20 feet in height. Jeff had a full head of hair, gums that didn't recede, and he did push-ups in the middle of the day. He had gone to Cornell, but had not played lacrosse like most of the guys in Barry's hedge fund. "So what's up, Barry?" Jeff said. "Just passing through Atlanta? Decided to look me up?" They were sitting in Jeff's kitchen. He had brought out a bottle of Yamazaki 20-year whiskey and was serving it straight up, quite decadent for 1:27 p.m. What the hell did Jeff Park do for a living? He had cashed out of Barry's hedge fund with zero. "All of this is gonna sound crazy," Barry said. "Uh-huh. I'm on a journey by bus." Barry knew he would eventually have to explain his flight from New York to people in his tax bracket. He knew that news of his meltdown would immediately form the latest bulletin in the incestuous, bloodthirsty world from which he had sprung. But he doubted it would really surprise anyone. The people in his world could be nuts. One fund was essentially a cult with its own Bible, ritual mind control, and feats of strength. One fellow at another fund, a quant billionaire in training, played piano at a third-rate bar while passing around a tip jar. Like your first ankle monitor bracelet or your fourth divorce, the occasional break with reality was an important part of any hedge fund titan's biography. "The things I've seen," Barry said, and he told Jeff a few of his Greyhound adventures so far. Jeff Park seemed interested. He poured more drinks, although he insisted Barry chase his with water. "Yeah," he said, "it sounds to me a little bit like you're doing a middle-aged version of On the Road." "Yeah, like that one-eyed Mexican guy in New Jersey you said fell asleep on your shoulder? That sounds pretty Kerouac." "That's exactly right," Barry shouted. Oh, no wonder he had picked Jeff Park to host him. The man had literary sensibilities beyond most of his colleagues. They really did a good job of educating up at Cornell, but not as good as here. Okay. "I used to take the Greyhound to visit my uncle's family in Savannah," Jeff said. "Everyone there looked at us like we were freaks." "Everyone looks at me like I'm a freak." "You kind of are a freak, Barry." Barry took that as the highest of compliments. He was bonding with this former employee whom he had fired. They were going to be friends now. "So are you from around here originally?" he asked. "Yeah," he said. "I moved back down to Atlanta to take care of my parents." "And your parents are, I want to say, from China?" "Close enough," Jeff Park said. "My wife is Indian," Barry said. "Rock," Jeff said. "You ought to get married," Barry said, completely forgetting that his own marriage was but a team of 7 lawyers short of kaput. His instinct to help Jeff Park was overwhelming. He remembered his wife's friend, this Asian woman from Brooklyn, Tina or Lena or something. "Hey, I threw away my cell phone," Barry said. "Can I check something on your computer?" A laptop was provided. It had been a week since he had touched a keyboard. He brought up his wife's profile. "What a gorgeous family you have," Jeff Park said, pointing at the profile photo of his wife and son. "When I worked for you, I think you were just about to get married. God, that kid of yours, those beautiful eyes." "Yeah," Barry said, his hand frozen over the keyboard. "Yeah, they're nice, but here's what I really wanted to show you." He scrolled through the list of Seema's friends until he found the right one. "Now this girl is spunky," Barry said. "She called me a tool to my face. And I think she's pretty intellectual like you. Oh, one night in Brooklyn, she made these great Chinese dumplings for us. I bet your folks would love her." "Mina Kim," Jeff Park read off the screen. "Ah, not really up my alley." Barry was heartbroken. "But she's Chinese," he said. Jeff Park stared at him. "Yeah, I'm more into the Southern Belle type," he finally said. "Ah," Barry sighed. "But thanks for looking out for me. You're like that woman from Fiddler on the Roof." Barry sort of knew what he was talking about. Matchmaker. Jeff Park had a wide cultural reach. "Well, I'm going to make it my mission to get you married," he said. "Nice guy like you." "I'm not averse to the ladies," Jeff Park said. "I've designed this place with them in mind." "Huh, how so?" Jeff Park took him on a tour, starting with a massive glass-top dining table. You see these lights, he said, pointing out a trio of Sputnik-style globes hanging over the mirrored surface. The average girl I date is 5'6", or an inch taller than the national average. I have a spreadsheet that lists the attribute of each girl I've ever dated. It's super granular. So if I'm making her dinner and she's standing there, waiting for me, talking to me, maybe having a drink, the light from these lamps is directly level with her eyes. She can see better, and I can enjoy her glow. Barry was impressed by Jeff Park's thoughtfulness. A spreadsheet. The rap on guys in finance was all wrong. They care too much. He knew he did. If you looked at it a certain way, he had abandoned his family because he didn't even have the emotional bandwidth to accommodate their special needs. He examined an enormous couch. This sofa is the perfect height for a 5'6" woman, Jeff said. When she sits down, the sofa waterfalls at the back of her knees. He invited Barry to sit down. See, there's a gap of at least 3 inches between the back of your knee and the couch because you're tall. But if you were a 5'6" woman, you'd be completely snug. So you only date women of that height? Barry asked. Well, there's some variance, Jeff Park said, maybe half a sigma. I don't want the tail wagging the dog, but yeah, mostly. You're a romantic, Barry said. Jeff Park shrugged and blushed. He was not unhandsome. His face was chiseled and tanned to perfection. The black athletic gear he was wearing made him look like a glossy seal in human form. Only the Rolex Sky Dweller on his wrist did not appeal to Barry's taste. Upstairs, Jeff had an airy office with full view of Atlanta's Midtown. Barry felt a twinge of passion at the sight of a fully operating Bloomberg terminal. Jeff had only one screen going, which was cute. On a glassboard, he had sketched out some trades that appeared exceptionally long-term and cautious, making some kind of play around Alcoa and Dow. Just scanning the numbers on the board, Barry assumed an AUM, assets under management, of 35 million, which in the best of worlds brought in what, like a couple million a year? And he could live on that and be happy and buy couches that waterfalled the legs of median women? I trade maybe 2 hours in the morning, Jeff Park said, and then I spend the rest of the day working on myself. I read at least 100 books a year, and if I'm at, let's say, 70 books by November, I'll take the rest of the year off to catch up. I like reading books to the girls I date. Beckett plays, Chekhov stories, Shakespeare sonnets. Believe me, they need culture around these parts. Wonderful, just wonderful, Barry said. This is what I'm talking about, real self-improvement, a vocation and an avocation. So many guys say, I want to die at my peak net worth, Jeff Park said, but not me. Clearly not, Barry said. Jeff now led him into a bathroom. They were looking at the double mirrors that functioned as TVs in the rain shower tub. So that's my favorite sentence in the book. Bring it up. So feel free to laugh. I'm going to read it again. I don't know why, but that nails everything. That book. Jeff now led him into a bathroom. They were looking at the double mirrors that functioned as TVs in the rain shower tub. Thank you. The GOP convention in Cleveland was in full blaze. Ted Cruz was saying he would not be voting for Hillary, but he wasn't going to endorse Trump either. I used to stay at the Trump Hotel in Columbus Circle whenever I visited New York, Jeff Park said. Never again. I'm a moderate Republican, Barry said. Socially liberal. I'm on a Greyhound bus, for Christ's sake. They went downstairs for a new course of drinks. Jeff Park was making them with ruby red vodka and Seagram soda now. They sat at a table made from the cross-section of a giant tree. Its height was also designed to seduce an average woman. Barry felt around the serrated bark of the edges. He liked his furniture slightly rustic with hints of the arts and crafts movement. That was supposed to be the motif of the Rhinebeck house if he ever finished it. Who made this? Barry asked. It's a Japanese eucalypti, Jeff Park said. I bought it in Kokura. It reminds me of how lucky I am. Kokura, Barry said. Yeah, you never heard of the luck of Kokura? Barry shook his head. I'll tell you, August 9th, 1945, an American bomber was headed to bomb Kokura on the island of Tinian, but there was too much cloud cover over the city that day, so the plane was diverted to Nagasaki. Wow, Barry said, lucky for Kokura. Right, luck. I mean, if I were born in, I don't know, Bangladesh to whatever, a family of rag pickers, would any of this happen? He gestured at his 4,500 square feet of property. My mother, he said, worked as a maid in Buckhead when they got here. I still remember the food stamps with the drawings of the old whiteys signing the Declaration of Independence. I memorized the words on it, U.S. Department of Agriculture Food Coupon. Where else could a maid's son end up like this? That's why I'll always take care of my folks. That's why I'll always live in Atlanta. I've got to honor the luck that was given me. Barry thought of his own relationship with his parents. His mother had died in a car accident when he was 5. He had bought out his father's swimming pool company for $4 million, about 10 times what it was worth, so that his dad could finally retire. But after that gesture, and after his father's openly racist behavior at his wedding, he mostly avoided the old man. He went out just once to La Jolla, California, where his father was living with his girlfriend Netta, whom he had found on an online Zionist forum. Netta was a former social worker and had 2 grown kids in L.A. The moment she met him, she grabbed Barry and pressed him into her freckled décolletage and proceeded to give him a detailed tour of her beautiful garden where she and Barry's father spent most of their time drinking coffee and looking at their laptops. Her house was a 1940s U-shaped ranch with back-to-back fireplaces, wild beehives in the pepper trees, little gardens of shiso leaf and miniature roses, 2 box turtles and a rabbit named Sylvester. There were plums that Netta's kids used to throw on the street to watch them get run over, and blood orange shrubs in the backyard. And in the middle of what even the Holy Bible would have to acknowledge to be the true Garden of Eden sat 2 elderly people in their Make America Great Again caps, silently scrolling through the latest outrage to their common gene pool in the dusty hills and valleys of another land. I'm so sorry about your son getting autism, Netta had said. Did you give him vaccines? I'm sure that's what did it. I told him not to get the vaccines, his father hollered from his perch beneath the plum tree. I sent him the link about how the Somalian Muslims were spreading it through their doctors in Minnesota. Barry was out of there in less than 36 hours. 8 months later, his father was dead of pancreatic cancer. Maybe Jeff Park was just a better son, and maybe better sons made for better people, and that was why their moms didn't die in car accidents, their faces caked in blood. Yeah, but that's not luck, Barry said, returning to the theme of the conversation. Okay, sure, it's helpful not to be born to rag pickers in whatever, Bangladesh, but mostly your success was a result of your own hard work and your parents' gumption to move here. You don't consider yourself lucky, Jeff Park said. Not for a minute, Barry said. I never had any advantages. I wasn't even lucky enough to have been born an immigrant. Jeff Park laughed. Now that's funny, he said. Thank you.
So I'm supposed to ask questions, but instead I just want to say a couple of things which are not questions.
Okay.
The first thing is, I read this thing in the Times about books that you had read recently. This is probably a little old now. Uh-huh. And it said that you had read Middlemarch, but you hadn't read Bleak House.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell everyone here something about Bleak House that I bet I'm the only person here knows. And that is that the word Ganef shows up in it.
No way.
Yes.
Now I will read Bleak House. Now that it's Ganef friendly.
Who knows this? Who knows this?
An English professor.
Except me,
yeah.
right? Anyway,
Ganef.
The other thing did you expect this from Dickens?
No.
You did not. Okay.
Did not.
The other thing is, it's just an appreciation of the scene that you just read, which only came to me when you were reading it.
You didn't like it when you actually read it on the page. It's okay.
Well,
yeah, okay.
You know, it's like audiobooks.
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
So I just tried this out on you, and tell me what you think. It seems to me at the beginning of this scene with Jeff Park seems like a sort of normal, decent guy. And you're playing off the normal decency of Jeff Park against the craziness of Barry, right? And then Jeff Park goes into the spreadsheet and the 5, 6, you know, and it's like, he's crazier than the other one, you know? And then it sort of circles back, and at the end, he's the one who takes care of his parents, and you can kind of skip the craziness somehow. This is very artful.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
so it's really just an appreciation.
Thank you. No, they're both nuts, you know, just in different ways.
You could miss that because of the game that you're playing.
Yeah.
All right, now I ask you questions.
Okay. Well, thanks for noticing that.
Well, just because, anyway. So, obviously, everybody asks you questions about choosing a hedge fund manager as a protagonist and giving him an autistic son.
Yeah.
So, actually, the autistic son is so powerful.
Thank you.
That I thought I would, this is not being irresponsible, I hope, but ask you what kinds of questions other people in this tour of yours have been asking about the autistic son, and maybe come back to the...
Yeah, so this is day 62 of an 87-day tour conducted by Greyhound. There's been a lot of questions about autism, and a lot of people who have come, some people on the spectrum, but also many parents of kids on the spectrum. So that's been a kind of, you know, I mean, again, my books are usually satirical and everyone's a schmuck, but, you know, in this book, there's a character who's, you know, who's on the spectrum, and that's brought out a lot of questions about why I decided to focus on a kid in the spectrum. There's a couple of reasons. So one is that a lot of my friends have kids who are autistic, a very large amount, and some of the hedge fund managers I met during my 4 years of hedge fund research also had kids who were on the spectrum. Another reason is, I think, a very personal one. I think I've always gotten along with autistic people and kids. When I came to America, I came in 79, 80, and it was the height of the Cold War, and I was sentenced to 8 years of Hebrew school for a crime I didn't commit. But, you know, I was sent to this yeshiva, and I was, you know, I didn't speak any English. We were very poor, and I was wearing this coat made out of Soviet gerbils or whatever. It actually had little gerbil heads sticking out of it. It had a particular smell, you know, because wet gerbil is not something you want to smell a lot. And so I remember it was so bad that I had to pretend to the kids in yeshiva that I was born in East Berlin, not in Leningrad. I mean, it's bad when you're convincing, you know, Jewish kids that you're actually a German. I had just a few friends, and again, I don't want to retro-diagnose, but looking back at who they were and how they interacted and some of their behaviors, so much of it was, you know, sort of the stimming, flapping, things that we now consider to be stereotypical autistic behavior. But they were the kindest people I knew, and they were the only kind people to me. So I always, in the back of my mind, thought, you know, that these were people that were genuine and not, you know, not immersed in the social aspect of life, which I find debilitating even now. And then it was just a matter of meeting the right people. I spent a great couple of days with Temple Grandin, who is amazing. We were at a conference on creativity in some fancy island, Sea Island, Georgia, and we spent a lunch drinking quite a bit. And I just thought that she, you know, yes, we think of autism as a communication disorder, and she didn't communicate in exactly the way that most people do, but she was clearly the smartest, funniest, and possibly most creative person at that conference, you know. So all of that made a huge impact on me, and I decided that I would try to, and it's very hard to do this because autistic people say very correctly, I think the slogan is nothing about us without us, you know. And in writing a book, you know, you don't collaborate with anyone, so you're not going to bring in an autistic person. But it's important, I think, to get as much research and just to spend as much time as possible.
So, in a way, that leads to the question about the hedge fund manager. I mean, it seems to me a really tricky thing to choose a hedge fund manager as a protagonist. I mean, I can imagine various ways in which it could go wrong. Maybe this is just my imagination, but I found myself thinking, for example, of the Scorsese film, The Wolf of Wall Street. Maybe it's not hedge fund.
That's not, no.
Okay, well, close enough.
Close enough,
Okay.
some finance.
So if you make the person sympathetic enough, then people sympathize, and the edge of the satire or the critique gets kind of softened. And if you go really heavy on the critique, you create a flat character, you know, and you didn't want to do that. And this, again, I'm sorry, it's a tribute rather than a question, really. You didn't create a flat character.
Thank you.
You really did, you know, create a character, and maybe more so even than the reading just now would lead people to think. Because that was a little closer to stand-up than the book is.
Okay.
So one of the reasons why I asked the, no,
I'll
trust
take
me
it,
on
yeah.
this, okay? This is, so one of the reasons why you have to emphasize the autistic kid is that's the real relationship, in a way, at the center. And if you think of him in relation to this kid, you know, not the women folk, for example, then you have to think about him in a different way.
Sure. Look, I mean, and this goes back to something else that, you know, this is, I mean, this book, hedge funds figure in this book, and somewhat explain as to what Barry does, right? And then there's the political element. It's set in 2016, so all the reviews were, you know, first book set in the summer of Trump, et cetera, although even having the T word in your headline kills sales immediately. But, you know, so those were things that were happening. But in general, what do novelists want to write about? I think we want to write about families and relationships. That's pretty much it. That's the nucleus of almost everything, you know. How do we relate to our partners? How do we relate to our fathers and mothers? How do we relate to our children? So the Barry-Shiva relationship, even though it's not really happening in parts of the book, is, I think, the most important part of the arc of the story. Same with his wife, Seema. But when I started meeting hedge funders, I mean, this was an interesting thing. I got into hedge funds, my friend introduced me to, several reporter friends I have introduced me to them. And a lot of them have read some of my works. A lot of them have grossly misinterpreted my works, too. There's a lot of them thought Supersad was like a critique of the Obama administration. I mean, it was you guys, some of you have read it, right? It's like it's a social media-driven crypto-fascist regime. It's more like what we have now. But I was being told that there was a group of tax cheats on the Virgin Islands who were using it as a as a book club selection, you know. And all this really confused me. And some of the first people I met in the world of hedge funds were absolutely scary. And they would, and this is before Breitbart, but they were speaking basically in terms of eugenics. You know, black people can't do this because of that, Asian people are like that because of this. Arabs don't really exist, they're not a real people. All this absolutely scary stuff. And this really, really shocked me, you know, because I thought, well, you think of hedge fund people, they're at least well-educated, et cetera. I just did not, and I thought this could be a fringe. But then after the election, and after I realized, you know, Breitbart was funded, but for example, by the Mercers, I realized this was more than just a fringe. There was a heavy presence of sort of, you know, not just, you know, grassroots up, but also top-down stuff coming through. But then I met a lot of really nice, comparatively nice, you know, hedge fund managers who always said things like, you know, I'm really progressive, Gary. I actually pay some of my taxes, you know. That was an actual quote that I got from the very beginning. But I also began to see a lot of these people were living very kind of moated existence, and that's one reason I wanted to put Barry on the Greyhound and send him away, you know, from his fund, from his life, because it seemed like they were, you know, they had their Upper East Side apartment, and they had their club in Midtown, and they had their fund in Midtown, and they had their house in the Hamptons, and they were sort of making this, you know, and so I would try to break him out of this and take him to my dive bar where I go all the time and be like, look, that's a middle-class person. Look how she's dressed. Isn't that interesting? You know, and I also noticed that their wives and children were also living these very moated existences. So one of the first people I met was a wife of a hedge funder, and I had a little kid, and he was, you know, applying to all these schools, and she said, oh, Gary, you have to send your kid to ethical culture. And I said, why? And she said, because it's so diverse. And I was like, really? She said, yeah. She said, it really is. She said, some of these kids, their dads aren't even hedge fund guys. They're just doctors or lawyers. So I realized quickly that although these, you know, I live amongst these people, I live in Manhattan half the year, that I really didn't quite know this culture well enough. And as the months turned into years, I became quite good friends with them. And I think a lot of the reason I became friends with them is that I think they found in me somebody who was willing to listen to them. I mean, and on and on and on, because we have, you know, I often thought of people in finance as they're working out at 6 in the morning. They're always running these runs. They always have these, you know, but they drank me under the table, and I'm Russian, you know. I can drink, but I would wake up at 5 in the morning, my wife trying to unbutton my, you know, shirt, trying to pump oxygen in me and stuff. So it got kind of out of hand. But the major problems I thought, when I was developing the character of Barry, and again, this is self-selective, this is not saying all hedge fund people like this, but the people I was drawn to and that were drawn to me, what I found was that they all grew up kind of lower middle class or lower class, something I knew quite well growing up. And when I was growing up, I remember watching the movie Wall Street thinking, why did they arrest him? What insider trading? It sounds so cute, you know? And so a lot of them and also a lot of them had a lot of tension with their families. Their mothers didn't love them enough. Their fathers always told them to do more. Nothing was ever enough. And a lot of them went to Stuyvesant High School, where I had gone. And a lot of them were immigrants, too. So there was a real kinship that I felt, and I think it worked both ways as to the kind of personalities I met.
So my last question suggested that for this protagonist, being a father is a pretty important thing. And in terms of the human deepening of this novel, and it's got a lot of depth to it, that's really important. One of the things that I was fascinated by along the way was his impulse to mentor. You know, he sort of finds young people that he can be a kind of father surrogate to, right? And I just wondered how satirical you were about that. Because, I mean, I could imagine you being either quite satirical or not quite satirical.
Well, I mean, I'm a professor at Columbia, so so I have a team of shrinks who have been discussing this book in a kind of conference call, and they were suggesting that, I mean, obviously I'm not Barry, but that a lot of who I am has been inserted.
Rhymes. Gary.
I know. I just switched out. No, you're not. Sorry. That's some good, literary critique there, but you've earned your salary. But yeah, I didn't just flip G and B and take away.
That's nothing. You're going to see.
You're going to see more. Okay. Great. Wait, what was the question?
Mentor.
A mentor, yeah. Yeah, so a lot of so I think a lot of the people I've met, they have enough money to last them gazillions of lifetimes. And the question sort of becomes, what am I doing with my life? So they see when they look at their Bloomberg, they look at their basis points on their Bloomberg, am I winning or am I losing against this other guy I hate, right? And then afterwards, many of them will get together and play poker against the very same people they're competing with during the daytime. So the idea is, and many of the people I've met, by the way, have over the years lost hundreds of millions for their investors. Their lifetime P&L, profit and loss, is negative. But they made one or two really great bets, and so they think, okay, I'm really great, And so they think, well, next I can maybe I should do some policy, education policy. I mean, let me spread my wings. And of course, our president is a businessman, right? Who's super successful businessman.
Just ask him.
Just ask him, yeah. And so so the mentor part to me came from a real instinct. I mean, I love teaching and I love being able to, help someone out. There's nothing like that. The happiest people I met on my Greyhound trip across the country were profs at the University of Texas at El Paso, and there's a lot of 70 pages of the book happens in El Paso, and these were amazing people who worked with almost everybody at that school as a first-generation college student, and a large part of the population commutes 4 hours from Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, going through that checkpoint, etc. So the mentoring part was real, but the satirical part was, so Barry, he's a watch collector, so he starts the Urban Watch Fund, which is a fund that helps, poor kids in the inner city buy their first Rolex and learn how to take care of it. This sounds stupid, but if somebody actually said that to me, I'm going to start one of those, I'd be like, yeah, I could see that happening. Barry's other idea is, to inspire capitalism amongst these kids is billionaire trading cards. So that you have the billionaire and then you have the stats on the back, and he's like, and we'll put Oprah on it, so it'll be super diverse too, So these ideas, I could honestly see some of the people I'd met sort of being like, yeah, that's what we're going to do.
So if I'm going to put on my critical hat here, I would say that mentorship business is where I see you as a bit of a patriot, which is not the first thing that I would have thought.
Yeah.
Just so in the following sense, that so I wrote a book about upward mobility stories, which is really about mentors once upon a time, and I got inspired by the story of Hannibal Lecter, which some of you will recognize, right? And I thought, my God, Hannibal Lecter is the the fairy godmother in a Cinderella story.
Yeah, I can see that.
I mean, if you think it structurally. And the weird thing about it is he wants the Clarice Starling, Jodie Foster character to succeed. Why the hell does he want that? You know, it doesn't make sense in terms of eating people with a nice Chianti and some fava beans, right? It just, you know, there's this little extra thing.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, he's playing mentor in an upward mobility story. And he kind of, and I guess there was something about me not quite being sure whether you were really just being funny about the mentor thing or, you know, that you were kind of invested in it. It made me think, you really did like the idea of the American dream and to sort of keep it.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, there's many ways to look at it. I mean, yeah, in terms of mentorship, I mean, he does want, so Barry's dream is the perfect family, right? Where in his Rhinebeck house, he builds 3 sinks next to one another because he wants 3 kids and he wants them to mirthfully, you know, splash each other over the sinks. But then, you know, his wife, they both have an autistic kid and he gets very angry at her and he says, you know, I married you for your perfect eggs. That's like one of the first horrible things that he says in the first chapter. Because she's, you know, she went to Yale Law School. She's very, you know, she's smart, she's beautiful, she's credentialed, as they say in this world. And, you know, he thought they would produce this child, and they produced a different kind of child. And she also, because she's the daughter of immigrants, she is very ashamed herself. She doesn't tell her parents about this for a long time. So I think Barry's dream is to have a relationship that's not his father, and we've heard a little bit about him. He wants to give something back to somebody, right? And he thought he would do it to his 3 children, but now he can't, you know, he can't handle an autistic kid, obviously. And so he, not to give away too much of the book, but he kind of goes around trying to mentor almost everyone he meets on the Greyhound. You know, that becomes his MO. You know, and these people do not want to be mentored by him for the most part, but that's what he's trying to do. So that became a kind of theme. But going back to the American dream, I mean, it's interesting. You know, when I grew up, when I came from the Soviet Union, it felt like America was the mentor, right? That everything we had done in the Soviet Union, this was 79, the country was beginning to really unravel at every level, social, economic. That version of socialism was not going to work. And America felt to us really like, you know, to use the cliche, the golden Medina, you know, the promised land. Everything here worked. I mean, you know, you had Buick Skylarks driving around in the streets, giant overpasses. That looked like science fiction to me when I came here. Everything. You know, there was that, I don't know if people still watch this movie, Moscow on the Hudson. It's a great, great film that really explains everything about this. That on the show, The Americans, really gets the 1980s so well. There's a scene, Robin Williams, the main character, he's Russian, and he walks into a shop in the 80s and he sees 800 different types of coffee. He's like, Nescafe, chock full of nuts, coffee, and he has a heart attack. And you know, and that's literally how we felt all the time. Everything was like that. So America was this country of mentorship in a way. And after the Soviet Union collapsed, my feeling was, okay, Soviet Union, deeply imperfect, but a society of very highly educated people. Everyone can quote Lermontov at will. And, you know, after 1991, I thought that eventually all the little goodies that the West had, not you know, the neoliberalism's greatest hits, but some version of civil society, some kind of rule of law, something to do with markets that was, you know. But in the end, it's not that Russia became more and more like America. The last couple of years has been this insane reversal of America becoming more and more like Russia, embracing essentially a kleptocratic model. You know, I mean, this is what Trump wants. I mean, I think he looks at Putin as a great inspiration. This is somebody who may well be the world's richest man. And Trump, as we know, we haven't seen his tax returns, but we know that he's not even close. So this is the great, scary thing now for me. And this is why, you know, so obviously I wrote Supersat True Love Story because I'm a dystopian. I'm a SAP. I'm a Soviet Ashkenazi pessimist. So for me, it's not that the glass is half full. There's no glass, you know. So for me that's why, one reason I never wanted to have a kid, you know, and because I really thought that the world was going to go to hell. And then, of course, I had a kid, you know, and yeah.
Maybe
I don't know how to continue that train of thought.
Well, you could, but Maybe I'll ask one more question and then we can throw it open. So start thinking of questions. The book is signed at the end with a kind of Joycean, series of dates and cities. It's kind of cool.
Thank you.
And I noticed that the final date is in December of 2016, which means that most of the novel was written before Trump got elected.
Yeah.
And you put Trump's election, the actual night of Trump's election, pretty late.
Yeah.
So that made me think it really would be a mistake to think of this as a satire of Trump's America.
Yeah.
That you were really shooting for something much more long-term.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And another fun thing is I finished the first draft, the main draft of it, on December 21st, the shortest day of the year, which felt very appropriate as well. So when I started writing the book, I wanted to write a book that was set during the election, but the election was really going to play fifth fiddle to the rest of the book because I thought, all right, Trump is this weird thing, the GOP messed up and they put this clown in and Hillary's going to win and it's, everyone's going to be embarrassed. And so when I got on the Hound in June, I really thought that the election would play a backdrop the way, if you read something about the 1980s or you watch a film or TV, there'll be like a Rubik's Cube on a table to say, oh, we're in the 80s now, right? So that's kind of, there'd be scenes, he's getting off the bus and in the Greyhound bus terminals, Trump is being a jerk on TV, he's saying something stupid. And we move on, and then that also helps to build in his father with the MAGA hat and all that. But as the journey continued, what was interesting was that people would tell me, on and off the bus, that what I thought was going to happen was not what was going to happen. Very early on, people told me he's going to win. They were very specific about it. They said, she's going to lose Pennsylvania. I was like, are you crazy? Look at 538.com. I mean, Pennsylvania? 97% chance. And they're like, no, you don't understand what people think. They think she's a liar. I'm like, anyway, this kept going on and on and on. And there's a scene in this book, and again, so much of this book is really journalism. I try to do almost everything that Barry does. The one thing I didn't get to do is Barry buys a crack rock in the beginning of the book, or he's given a crack rock, and then he smokes it. I mean, because, the Chekhov rule of crack rocks, if someone gets a crack rock in the first act, they gotta smoke it by the third act. So, yeah, everyone kept offering me fentanyl and meth, and I was like, crack? Anyone? But there was a scene that happened in real life, which was in a state we'll call Louisiana. I get on the bus, and all these white supremacists get on board too. And they start talking very loudly about crucifying Muslims and Jews. And I am Jewish. And so, just like Barry, I get off in Shreveport, Louisiana, and there's a New Testament coloring book. And Barry gets back on, he's like, Romans 2, as our president says, right? So that was kind of scary. But as the journey continued, we went through Grambling State University, which is a historically African-American college. And it was summer, but there were some students hanging around. And this drove the white supremacists crazy. And one of them said, well, they got their colleges. One day we'll have ours. And I was like, what part of Dartmouth don't you understand, right? But here's the scary part of all this to me. And they were quoting Breitbart for the first time. I've read about it, but they were quoting it and all these things. And the scary part is there were maybe 4 of them. Most of the rest of the bus were people of color, Jewish guy. Nobody challenged them. They were speaking loudly. We looked away. We looked out the window. We looked at our phones. We pretended we were asleep. They just kept talking and talking and talking. And that's when I decided this book had to change. That I couldn't just let Trump, and not just Trump, but all of it, Breitbart, all of it just sneak past, because it felt that this was, I thought, what if the people on the bus became the people in the government? And that was my thought, And so that was kind of the turning point for the book.
Okay, your turn. You got a microphone.
Oh, there.
Hi, Gary. Thank you for the wonderful reading. It really came alive.
Oh, thank you.
Quite honestly, in your voice. So I'm an occupational therapist, and I work with a lot of kids on the spectrum. Yeah. And as I'm sure you know and you've done in your research, there's a very wide spectrum of kids who are non-communicative to kids who are extremely high-functioning. And I was wondering what made you decide that Shiva would be on the high functioning end of the spectrum?
Thank you. That's a great question, and very particular. And well, I wanted a real break in communication because, and many, I don't want to give anything away, but many readers and what do they call them? Book reviewers? English is not my first language. Many book reviewers, sort of talked about the fact that Barry might himself be somewhere on the spectrum. Absolutely, right? Which also was something that a lot of people I met in the hedge fund world would tell me about the people, their supposed friends. They would say, well, the reason, Jeff is such a jerk is he's on the spectrum. That became kind of like a standard thing. But, and again, without giving too much away for readers who haven't read it, Barry does have an encounter with a child at one point in the book who is, I would say, on the higher end of the spectrum. But that would almost make it too easy for, in terms of setting up the plot, I needed somebody who he could not have any real conversations with, or even the kind of sort of, give and take that we have physically with a child. Many kids, many kids have delays and they don't speak until a certain age, et cetera, but they can still, there's an emotional interaction, there's eye contact, et cetera. So Barry has none of that with Shiva. And also, and again, not to give anything away, but I also wanted Shiva to have a kind of journey of his own throughout the book. And what was interesting is after the book came out, many parents of autistic kids wrote in saying that their kids had a very similar journey. It's very real, absolutely. But it's something that's starting out, I only knew a few kids who were nonverbal, and I couldn't see what they would be like 10, 15 years from that point. You've seen them, right, yeah. So that was an interesting thing where the research, I was kind of extrapolating from what could happen, but then the research and the reality of it kind of, or my imagining of it and the reality of it kind of intersected. And that's always great when that happens.
Hey, Gary, love the book. I'd be curious to hear, were there any parts in particular where you felt either stuck or you were going to go a different direction that would totally change the story? Like, was there anything that stood out to you where you sort of felt challenged?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got majorly stuck because I wrote the first iteration of this book, and it was something completely different. It was a global thriller starring a woman who worked for a hedge fund. I wrote 160 pages of it, and I realized I cannot write a thriller. Yeah, I'd written parts in Seoul, Bombay, Beijing, Shanghai, Berlin. I mean, it was all over the world. It was going to end in the North Pole. Super, and I have a great editor, and I sent her the 160 pages, and she sent me back 160 pages of notes. Too polite to say, this sucks. More like, oh, what about this? And I realized a couple of things. First, I met a few women who were hedge fund managers, but there were very few of them, honestly. They exist, but most of the women I met worked in investor relations and other parts of it. But also when I was talking, all my characters are always falling apart. That's kind of the stuff I love, Why write about someone who's happy and has a great pension fund, et cetera, So everyone's falling apart. And the women I met were actually doing great. They were, their funds were not losing money. They were not doing this sort of testosterone-based crazy, blow-ups. And so I thought, first of all, there's not enough of a sample space for me to know them, and also they're actually good investors, the ones I met anyway. So I began to look for somebody more like Barry. And once I put out that casting call, oh boy, there was an army of Barrys marched past my table at the Core Club. And so, but in terms of once I failed at the first draft of the novel, I realized that I had 6 months to write next draft if I was going to, keep paying for that mortgage, which I really love. And I think hunger is very important for writers. I wasn't going to starve, but it's important. It's a great motivator, and when we look at the career of writers and other artists, they're often best at when they're struggling. And again, I'm not struggling per se, but just knowing that I had financial obligations, that I had 6 months for to kick in the next installment for my publisher. Boy, I got on that hound and I worked night and day. I wrote most of it on the dog itself. Stopping by horrible hotels, Travelodge, oh my God, and just scribbling and writing and scribbling and writing. And after that, it's almost like I willed myself not to fail.
Hi, Professor Robbins kind of touched on this, but because you're a writer that's so effortlessly funny, how and when do you decide in your stories or in your novels to kind of purposefully tone down your humor in the service of having the reader experience other emotions?
This is the toughest challenge any sort of humorous writer can have, I think. We live in an era where, we sort of think of literary fiction as being very serious, and there are a couple of writers that really do kind of break that. I think a lot of them are Columbia, Sam Lipsyte, for example. There's this feeling that, we're in a serious time, things have got to be serious, but I find that I think the reason I kind of became a satirist and somebody who deploys humor is growing up in the Soviet Union. Everything was a secret joke. My parents would tell me all these Brezhnev jokes, but you couldn't tell them to anyone, right? So I'll tell you one that would sort of really captures what I'm talking about. The joke is that it's the 1980 Moscow Olympics, and Brezhnev has to give the opening speech. It's a really big deal. But by this point, he's completely senile. He's going to die in 2 years. He's barely there. So he climbs on the podium, and he starts reading the thing, and he goes, oh! Oh! Whoa! And his assistant climbs up and says, "No, Comrade General Secretary, those are the Olympic rings." So that joke has so many levels. It's a performative joke, right? You have to do it. It's a joke about, we're being ruled by idiots. But the other part of the joke is we are unfortunate enough to be ruled by idiots. The joke is on us as well. That's our leader. That's the person who's setting the economic, social, totalitarian policy for this entire country of 330 million people, right? It's a kind of Jewish joke, too. It's a kind of joke from the edge of the grave, And that's the kind of jokes that I think, for me, are harder to get than just straight-up drama. I'm not saying that, books that are pure drama can't capture one's attention. They often do. To use another Cold War metaphor, for me, it's like an intercontinental ballistic missile, right? And the payload is tragedy. What you want to communicate is the very sad state of affairs on a social level, on a personal level, who we are as families, as children, as citizens of a country, and the rest of the missile is humor. The point is to get that tragedy across, but I find nothing better. And the other final thing I want to say is that I still believe in literary fiction that it can be a form of entertainment. To combine it with art is very hard, but I still, you mentioned Dickens. You read Dickens, you couldn't stop. I mean, he used certain strategies that contemporary writers would certainly ignore, but whatever the case was, he was able to communicate what it was to live across all class lines in the Britain of his day, And that's what I think good humor and good writing can still do.
I actually enjoyed the softer, poignant parts most in the book. I love the satire. I knew your satire, but this was what was most remarkable to me. I mean, absolutely beautiful part. So it's that mix, I imagine. But my question is about the research into watches, which I imagine you did.
I knew this would happen.
But then someone spilled the beans and said that you actually know about watches. So this wasn't your research into this character.
No.
This is. So did any of the fund managers give you your watches to wear?
It's funny because a lot of the fund managers I met, I noticed that some people trade on the trading floor, et cetera, would have usually the Rolex Submariner or Hulk or whatever. But at the higher levels, very few people even had watches. It's like they didn't care about time. Time functioned for them, not the other way around. So often their wrists would just be bare. And on this book, on the 68 Days of Touring, there's not been one reading where somebody hasn't asked me to sign their watch strap, which is so cute. Usually it's just asthma inhalers and anxiety meds, Those are my readers, right? But now I've expanded beyond the asthmatic and anxious and into people with nice watches. So this happened during fiscal year 2016. I was starting to notice, as we were saying, that the politics of this country were slightly getting out of hand, and I was suffering anxiety attacks. One in the subway, and at this point, I began. I wanted to stop reading 538.com all the time, And my wife got me a nice, decent watch, and I started to look at watches because, it's like any hobby. It's the nomenclature of, I don't like baseball statistics, for example, so this became like it's the Rolex C, blah, blah, blah. It's such and such movement. And then I started, really getting into it. And I started buying these watches. And I became something of an expert, and I became drawn. I wrote a piece for The New Yorker about it, and I began to be drawn into the watch community, which is a thing, with secret watch meetups in secret bars all over the world, where you walk in, everyone's got their watch, and everyone throws their watch down, and there could be $1 million worth of watches there. So that's why it's secret.
Throw your watch down?
You put it down on the table, and then some other watch nerd will come and pick up your watch, and you'll pick up, his or her watch, and you'll look at it. And so I began to buy these watches and oddly enough, I don't know anything about investing. In fact, at their drunkest moments, some of the hedge fund guys I hung out with were like, "Don't invest in my fund, just low-cost index funds will just get you through." But I just do that. But the portfolio, I did begin to think of it as a kind of, alternate asset class, and I began to buy them. And the ones that I bought, many of them have really increased in value. The one I'm wearing now has fascinating provenance. It belonged to Richard Nixon's NASA advisor. It's a Rolex GMT from the 60s. So, and I read some interviews with this guy, and I think mostly he had to deal with Spiro Agnew because he was given the NASA portfolio, and he, of course, completely messed that up. But in my dream, this watch was present during, one of Nixon's midnight rants where he was like, "Jews colonizing space." Probably not, but it's a dream. But,
Can you recommend some books to us, some favorite authors?
Ooh, can I recommend some books? Yeah. So I teach a couple of courses at Columbia, literature courses. I teach fiction workshops, which are always fun. But the seminars, I teach one called, I think it's like Immigrants a Go-Go or something. So a lot of immigrant fiction. Who's great? Well, my mentor, speaking of mentors, I really did have a mentor who got my first book published. And he was Chang-Rae Lee, the author.
Wow.
Who is, because I was going to go.
It's a good mentor.
It's a good mentor. He got me my book deal. He had started a program at Hunter College. It's fun to miss the R at the end. And at Hunter, he said, because I was going to go to Cornell, they have a good MFA, and he said, "No, don't go there. Go to Hunter." Sorry, no, they don't speak. He doesn't speak like that. If Hunter was anthropomorphized into a person, he would speak like that. But Chang-Rae said, if you come to Hunter, he would say it correctly, "I'll get you a book deal." And that's why I came. And he got me a book deal 2 weeks later. So of course, I recommend it. But I do think he's one of the best writers. And when I teach his books in the workshop, it usually goes really well. I do love Jhumpa Lahiri. I'm fascinated by her because one thing she did was, so this is the big question, people really ask me, like, why aren't you writing about Russians? Because people always think an immigrant writer has to write about their own group, right? And Barry's Jewish, so, baby steps. But she did something pretty profound. She just left, not just writing about Bengali immigrants, but she left writing about Americans completely. She moved to Italy and started writing in Italian. And the reaction was very negative from most critics, And I think, I haven't read it, so I can't quite comment, but the reaction was very negative. And I remember even when Chang-Rae published a book that didn't have Korean American characters, prominent Korean American, there was still some kind of like, "But why aren't you doing your thing?" And that's something that concerns me. The idea to be able to leave, your sacred ground. In terms of writers I read now, so the next book I'm writing may have something to do with Russian interference in our current society, and for that I would say Masha Gessen is the best person to read on that. So The Future is History is the book that you should read, everyone should read. Yeah.
Barry, so you mentioned about the misinterpretation of the super side true love story. So what do you think about the current book reviews of this one, and anything really surprising to you?
Anything really surprising in the book reviews? Well, I'm somebody who's very scared of reviews, good or bad. I think the good ones are undeserved, the bad ones are probably right. So I'm really scared of them. And I look at the major ones from the major papers, and then I kind of tune out and try not to think about it. Because the idea is, how much do you want to influence? Like there's writers I really trust, like Michiko Kakutani was always great, and I could, when she critiqued my work, I could there was something I could really learn from it. Ron Charles from the Washington Post is terrific. The NPR stations can be really good. What surprised me? I mean, I guess it didn't surprise me, but I think the fact that almost everyone led with Trump. Almost every review said, this is a book about the Trump era. And you were saying this too. And Bruce was correct in saying that maybe the last 50 or so pages happened after he's elected, but not even in power. So, and there was a funny article in a Scottish newspaper that called, I think it was me, Rushdie, and Barbara Kingsolver called us the Rapid Reaction Squad or something, because we were the first to run into the burning building, and I think he actually used that burning building metaphor, but I think we just ran in and said, oh my God, the building's burning, we can't put it out, and then ran out. But, again, and that did surprise me, because I thought that the emphasis would be more on, I mean, if you look at the jacket copy, we didn't present this as a Trump book. In fact, originally there were more references to Trump, and my editor actually said, please, let's take out, we can't do more than 6 in the book, and we'll have like a trigger warning at the bottom of each page, because, it's that scary. And in the end, I got away with 16 of them or so. But that was something that the publisher was very worried about in terms of people just, Trump has invaded every aspect of our lives. This is what writing a book is so hard these days, because sure, there have been authoritarian regimes, but, in the Soviet Union, inside your house, you were living in a kind of sacred space with your family. And the same probably true in other authoritarian regimes. Once you walked outside, there would be the big banner of the great leader and some really stupid slogan, let's increase ball bearings 25% this year. But that would be it. But now, because our real life, or more than 50% of our life is virtual, he will enter every single part of it. It's the scariest kind of totalitarian regime, because he's everywhere. And how do you write about that? It's almost like the writer becomes a kind of fence maker. She has to set the little fences around what still is important to us, to try to protect us from that. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, that was the...
Could I ask about the reaction from your hedge fund manager friends? First of all, did you think about them as an audience, speaking of mentorship, while you were writing, and did that change how you wrote? And then subsequently, how have they responded to the book?
Well, so I'm still really good friends. I mean, they text me like every second with a couple of them. But the couple that I stayed friends with were, I mean, I would say that what kind of unites them is the fact that they were sort of intellectuals from the start, that they had PhDs in math or science or physics or whatever, and they kind of, the calculus they made was, where am I going to be an assistant professor at, North Dakota Bismarck, or am I going to make, $30 million a year? And I don't know. I like Bismarck, but it's got real character. But they chose this life, And once they did, it kind of. They were the ones that I think that read the book. I gave them advanced copies, and they helped out with. And I did, of course, make some mistakes, and some mistakes may still exist. But they read it, and they all really, really liked it, and their wives read it. In fact, there was again a little kind of book club, and these are, of course, the more sort of progressive people, not the eugenics type of people. But the other interesting thing is, I think that many people read the book and said, this I always realize. So comedy is, I think I'm X, but I'm actually Y, right? The comedy is, we never know who we are. We think we know, we sort of know, but we don't really know. That to me, that's humor, right? When I wrote Absurdistan, which was a book about a 325-pound son of Russian oligarchs, I had a friend who was a 325-pound son of Russian oligarchs, and he ran, and we lived like a block apart, and I was so worried when he would read this book, because, and he was running after me, and I was kind of running away toward the subway station. And he's like, Gary, I loved Absurdistan. Who is that schmuck Misha Abramov?
Can I just throw something in?
Yeah.
Jonathan Swift said something about satire. He said, satire would be great, except everybody thinks it's about someone else.
That's it. That's exactly right. So that's been the same here with this book, with Super Sad, because I had to hang out with a bunch of people like that. The only book where people know who they are is my memoir, and that's what made that so scary, writing that, because you actually say, X person did this.
So a little bit off topic, but I was wondering who your classes at Columbia are open to, only MFA students or non-matriculated students as well.
Thank you for asking. Do you want to join my class? I believe it's, there are deans on the premises who could answer this better than I, but I believe you have to be in the Master of Fine Arts in any subject, though. I think writing, nonfiction, poetry, any of that. So what I'm saying is you should definitely apply for an MFA. We have a delicious MFA program. It really is heads and shoulders above the rest. So yeah, we'll talk. I'll give you, we'll admit you right away and get you in my class. I'm kidding, we can't do that. There's a process, but okay.
So it's more or less time for you to buy books and get them signed. A really, really quick question, because you mentioned Ron Charles in the Washington Post review. People will have seen, if you spend your time online, that there's a very cool video review, which reminded me of a very cool video trailer you had done with James Franco. Could you talk about all this?
Right. So because, most people in America don't really like books that much, but they love movies. So all my trailers feature great stars. First was James Franco, who was actually a student of mine at Columbia. That's how we became friends. Then I had Paul Giamatti, Rashida Jones. She was great. And for this trailer, just go online, YouTube, Google Shteyngart, Ben Stiller, and hedge-fund. It worked out really great. It's a 2-minute video. It explains a lot about how hedge funds work. We're two, white males who run a hedge fund into the ground. We're losing money all the time. One of our colleagues loses $500 million on llama futures, and we're like, hey, that's cool, So I love doing these videos, and I've worked, and I'm now working a lot more with TV. I love the TV space. Film to me is like a short story, but TV really reminds me of novels. So I've worked on Succession, the great HBO series. Check that out. I've consulted for the second season of that, and I can't say anything yet, but we're moving toward interesting things with all of this stuff too. So,
okay,
stay tuned.
So I think we can thank him now.
Well, thank you. Guys, thanks, dude.
You gotta go sign, I think.